Today's podcast is brought to you by Blue Canary. The bird has landed on beautiful Bainbridge Island, conveniently located at 499 Madison Avenue. ASE Master Technician Clint Ramsey brings over 15 years of experience, award-winning diagnostic skill, and a desire to reinvent the automotive repair experience. Schedule an appointment online at bluecanary.biz or call them today at 206-451-4220. I got something for your mind, body, and soul. I got something for your mind, body, and soul.
You have found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. Now here's your host with the most, Tiny Tim.
What's good, Podcastville? You found the B.I.STANDER Podcast. I'm your host, Tiny Tim, the king of casual, a.k.a. the Mr. Rogers of podcasting. I have a gentleman with me today, Jim Halbrook, who is somebody you might find in the neighborhood. Jim, how you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Jim came to my attention because he's done some eco-protesting in my neighborhood, and he... I think you've been going for 2-3 years now, right?
Yeah, since I think I'm going on to 4 years.
That's incredible. A friend of mine told me about you, and then I saw the New York Times illustration and short article about you. New York Times author, illustrator was visiting Bainbridge Island and picked up your story. Was that about 3 years ago now? Mm-hmm. And you were protesting what became kind of the McMansions, where these oversized, out-of-place development near my home, near Rotary Park, by the Winslow Reserve there. Horrible this is just my opinion, and I don't give my opinion often because I'm supposed to be the bystander, the fly on the wall. These houses have horrible architecture and way oversized and really don't fit in the community. Furthermore, they've taken a toll on the environment to some extent. Can you tell me how you got so disgusted that you would make signs and walk back and forth hours and hours every day of the week protesting this type of growth?
Initially, when I noticed the sign that gave the public notice that there was going to be a development there.
Oh, the little yellow sign that everybody kicks over?
Well, yeah, this was a very large sort of white one that you could read it from the street, okay, saying that there was going to be a land use change at this site.
Let's get that mic a little closer before we keep going. Thank you.
And so I contacted the city to find out about it. And once I learned the scale of the development, I wrote letters and attended city council to object to that sort of development because it between Finch and Weaver Roads is a creek that runs from the Suzuki Forest down to Eagle Harbor. And that creek is flanked by pasture and forest land that was home to a lot of wildlife.
Yeah, pheasants, coyotes, rodents.
Pheasant, exactly. And so I knew it was going to destroy that habitat. And what they had in mind was on one side of the creek was about 18 to 20 McMansions, and on the Finch Road side of the creek was another dozen. So, of course, it just goes through. The city hears your objections, but they're not going to stop a development. And the final step of that process goes to the hearing examiner. And so there, it's sort of a semi-judicial sort of hearing to determine whether the project should go ahead or not. So a number of neighbors and myself attended that meeting and provided testimony. And the developer's lawyer was there and just pretty much dismissed us all as having no standing. And the environment does not, supersede the builder's rights to put up the McMansions. So that was sort of a done deal.
But wasn't this developed during, sorry to interrupt, but wasn't this developed during the critical area ordinance being in effect?
Well, I think this actually spurred that moratorium and the critical areas ordinance, and in fact the ARPA, the Aquifer
Recharge.
So I think all of that happened kind of as a result of this, because in addition to these developments, there was the sort of the row houses that were constructed there on Wyatt, just a block off of Grow. I don't know if you remember those.
The Grow community, or
no, it was like just west of there, just down the hill a little bit, right where Lovell hits Wyatt.
Right. Okay.
That was a forest area too. So a lot was sort of happening there. They were really cramming in a lot of development on these tiny spots. So I just felt quite powerless, and because I've been objecting to overdevelopment and land degradation for a long time, I thought I had to do something more than just write letters, because that just doesn't work very well. So not knowing what to do, I decided I would just make a sign and be a witness to what's happening in my community. And so that's what I started doing. I went out on the street there, I think about the time they were pouring the foundations, and I went out there many times a week, sometimes every day for many months. And I don't go out there with the same frequency, but I still go out there 4 years later. Because it's already happened. People live there. But I think it's important still to bear witness to what has happened there and to not normalize environmental degradation.
Right now, there's a trail adjacent to it that I walk often with my dogs, and now there's a land reserve by that other section off Lovell in Wyatt that's turned out to be a nice park. So if you don't know the history of it, it looks like a well-developed place where, we have some type of sense of coexisting with nature. But didn't that development not only take away environment for animals, but didn't it disrupt the creek as well?
I think, as far as I can tell, that the creek remained more or less unchanged. I don't think they diverted it or anything. And it's sort of a bit of a seasonal creek where there's more flow in the winter than in the summer. But the animals, it's important. It was important for the animals because I live about a quarter of a mile to the west of there, and there's a creek that runs through the far edge of my property. And wildlife would move back and forth between those two areas. And since this development went up, I don't see any pheasant anymore. I used to come across them in my pasture all the time. They're just gone now because they need sufficient area to roam around and to hide from predators, and that's gone now. So the creek is still there. There's a buffer zone of, 20, 30, 40 feet, but it's not a zoo. Animals can't live,
No.
in a confined space. They need more adjacent area to form, a stable habitat. When I've been out on Finch Road, I've seen deer cross from the west side of Finch to the east side where the development is. And it'll start to walk down the little dead-end cul-de-sac there. And, well, first of all, it walks across the street and it bumps into the fence. So they surrounded this compound with a fence. So the deer walk along the fence. They find the little street entrance to the cul-de-sac, walk down the cul-de-sac, 10, 20 feet, realize it's a dead end, return back to Finch Road, and then head up the street along the fence line again, kind of give up, and then cross back Finch, where they came from. So
that's not a safe crossing either.
No, it's a residential street with a lot of blind driveways. The speed limit's 30, but people drive way faster than that.
Unfortunately, one man was paralyzed and another was killed right there as well by a car.
That's right. And I have a neighbor that's been living there for like 20-something years, and he said there was a serious accident even before that years ago. So, yeah, that intersection of Sportsman and Finch is very dangerous. Mm-hmm. I've complained to the city a number of times about it, and they don't seem to be very interested in reducing the speed limit to 25, but that's another issue.
Yeah, I think incorporated Winslow, including that area, should be 25 to 20, really.
Well, it's 25 on Wyatt, just at the end of the street, and that's a busier street.
You would never know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. That drives me nuts, that blind corner, for sure. Tell me a little bit about your background. You were a biochemist? Is that what your background is?
Yes, I was a scientist, and I retired about 10 years ago, and now I am a subsistence farmer.
What kind of things do you grow?
I grow all the food I eat.
Awesome.
Broccolis, tomatoes.
Root vegetables, the whole shebang?
Yeah, carrots, potatoes, beans, corn, wheat, rye, oats, fruit.
You got oats, huh? And there's no problem with rodents and stuff? And
the deer like the oats.
Yeah.
I grew them successfully for several years before they found them. Now they found them, I have to come up with some other plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, they like oats. They won't eat wheat or rye. But yeah, those are, I'm just experimenting with, I can grow a year's worth of oats and rye. Wheat, I find it harder in this environment. I haven't figured that out yet.
A little wet for it, right?
I guess so. I mean, it obviously grows well in the east part of the state.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess there's a reason for it. But rye seems to grow fairly well here.
My veggie garden right out front of my house, the first plot, all Russian kale. I'm feeling a little embarrassed during these times about the Russian kale. So if you want some Russian kale starts or some yearling kale, hit me up, please.
Well, what I like about the kale is I use that as cover crop.
Yeah,
it grows so well. I mix that with rye, and that stays all winter long. It's great.
Right. It can go to seed pretty quick too, though. Mm-hmm. My son loves the flowers right before it goes to seed in his salads. Mm-hmm. It's really good stuff. That's fascinating. So you're kind of a little bit closer to off the grid and in touch with your environment and the ecosystem and such.
Yes, and that is, how I really came to appreciate how my life is dependent upon a healthy environment and a stable climate. Before this, it was clear to me that climate change was a real problem. This really crystallized my thinking on how serious a problem this really is. And that's why I feel it's worth my effort to try to do something about it.
So one of City Council's guiding principles is climate change. I think it's one or two right at the top of their top 10 list. You decided to run for the vacant City Council spot. How well do you think City Council is doing in that sworn oath of climate change here on the island?
Very poorly. In fact, I believe that the majority of the City Council are climate deniers. I wrote to the City Council and asked them specifically this question: how does environmental destruction and degradation contribute to global warming and climate change? Joe Dietz, the mayor presently, wrote back to me and said, I'll paraphrase because I don't have his response in front of me, that climate change is neither his nor the city's responsibility.
Seriously?
Yes.
This is one of the guiding principles of city council.
There are 8 guiding principles, and I think 6 of them relate to environmental protection and stewardship. The city,
if that's the case, why do we have to protect our aquifers and have the critical orients and the moratorium on development if we're not thinking about that? That's asinine.
Well, I think, in my opinion, the city has been completely corrupted, and by that I mean that they participate in a corruption of democracy. In addition to being climate deniers, they appoint people with a vested interest in land degradation to a lot of these committees, like the Planning Commission, like the Climate Change Advisory Committee, Green Building Task Force. All of these city-sponsored committees have a vested interest in land degradation. If you look at now, it's been a couple of years since I've been to the Climate Change Advisory Committee meeting, but when I attended several years ago, I asked the committee why they were not considering land use in their approach to climate change. Mm-hmm. They were simply considering greenhouse gas emissions in sort of an abstract way. And the committee chairman, Michael Cox, told me that, quote, they are not doing that, unquote. That is, they are not considering land use. Well, if I could distill 50 years of climate science into one statement, it would be human-induced environmental degradation is the cause of global warming and climate change. Yet, the committee refuses to consider the land, the actual earth under our feet, as part of their analysis. So to get back to sort of my original sort of point, was that several of the members of this committee are land use consultants. A land use consultancy is like a company that helps developers figure out how to get around environmental laws. That's what they do. They may say, oh yeah, save some trees over here, but here are the laws and here's what you can do. There was someone who worked for PSC or a consultant for PSC. So their interest is not in really protecting the environment and climate change, it's in development. So if you look at their report, it's so bad, I don't even know where to begin. You know, I could talk to you for probably 3 hours on this report.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so one of the first statements they make is that that Bainbridge Island will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2045, and 3 years from now, 2025, greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced by 25%. And in 2035, they'll be reduced by 60%. That is just so bizarre. Like, we are growing, raising the earth, putting up tract homes and McMansion developments, and just recently, the church, which is just a stone's throw from this McMansion development, wants to put 21 houses on a spot that's only zoned for one, a 2,000% increase in the housing density at this church site. Yet we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 90%. It's I don't know if it's negligence or stupidity or deception that they would make such statements without sort of.
I think we have low-income housing rot in our brain, and everybody's scrambling to find some solution when there really isn't a solution in my mind. we have had ample opportunity from, what do we call it? Place over by the schools there, Northtown Woods, the Grow community, a few other places that have been developed under the LEED or green acts. Like, we're going to make this as earth-friendly as possible, but it's completely densified in what used to be open spaces or forest. And then they commit to a certain amount of low-income housing, but then the developer can choose to spend the money on lead or green housing and not build the affordable housing. I look at this as an island. It is not a place of residential low-income housing. Yes, we have to have a certain amount of people come from off the island to work here. Yes, some of our firemen and teachers can't afford to live here. But it is a place that environmentally, is an incredible place. We're surrounded by water. The entire island is. There's forests. There's land trust area. There's diverse wildlife and such. It's waterfront property a lot, and I don't see a solution to low-income housing. But I also see that we've far exceeded the absorption of growth for Kitsap County. We do not need to continue to build, but there's a huge push to build affordable housing. How do you think the Wintergreen property versus a church property? I mean, Wintergreen is already an asphalt jungle. And there's also a plan to put in stacked housings there for low-income housing. Why do you think the church is jumping in on this? I mean, they have a beautiful orchard there, a lot of space, great bird wildlife. It's a nice breakup between the houses right there. Why do you think they've jumped into this low-income housing game?
I've spoken with the pastor of the church, several congregants, and they insist to me that they're not making any money on this, that they're going to have nothing really to do with it except they're donating the land, apparently.
I feel that to be true, though. Do you?
Perhaps, but until we actually see the plan, we won't know. They've been very guarded about what they're doing, so nobody really knows what their plan is. An architect, just last night at the Planning Commission, John Davis, architect, who seems to be representing them, although the church told me specifically he was not, so there's something is inconsistent there. But nonetheless, last night at the Planning Commission meeting, he presented a proposal where how the 21 units were going to be spaced in this area. There was no mention about how, the mechanics of the donation and who pays for it exactly. Although one of the congregants spoke during public comment and mentioned that they really need to do this because they want to get their hands on $1.7 million of government ARPA money, the federal government funds designed to help mitigate shortfalls in city revenue because of the pandemic. Ironically, the city has stated that this is supposed to be earmarked for environmentally conscious projects. Anyway, back to the church. So I asked them if this is not, about overdevelopment and greed, why not just build one or two or whatever number of affordable houses that are consistent with the zoning at that site? So it's presently zoned R0.4, which means one house per 2.5 acres, which is the same zoning across the street on Finch that the neighbors live. He said that they don't want to do that because providing an affordable house for one person is not as good as providing for a couple dozen people. And I stated that in my mind, that is greed of charity. You're asking that for the neighbors to have to live next to a high density development that is not zoned for that level of density. And what is the problem with having an affordable house or two that some deserving person, family, could live in just like the rest of the neighbors, in harmony with the neighborhood? Like, why does affordable housing necessarily have to be high density?
That's a good question.
And to me, I told them, I said, I called it greed of charity. And they insisted that, at the time we were talking about 32 units, that number's come down, but they said 32 is better than one. Mm-hmm. And, in Sunday school, I learned that God's love was infinite. It's not divisible. It's not
measured by 20 houses or 5.
Right. If you unconditionally love someone, you unconditionally love all humanity. So that sort of accounting mechanism to describe love it just doesn't make sense to me. Not only that, I said, you can't say that, we just are, we're donating this land for overdevelopment and now we wash our hands of it. We're not responsible for what happens after that. And I say, no, that is not true. You cannot, rid yourself of the burden of unleashing the forces of greed and development on this community. And it doesn't work that way because they're taking advantage of developers and architects and consultants that all want a piece of the action. Mm-hmm. So I just disagree with that.
There's been a habit of not actually making a decision or a vote on things and hiring another consultant. We did it with the logo for I don't know how long, branding the city. I think we spent more on consulting fees than we did on the logo. Just stone's throw from the Studio 15 here. There's a toothpick forest that the city owns that they wanted to put 70. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's aquifers and there's trails where the kids walk safely to 2 schools, if not 3. It's a very well-traveled, coexisting type place with a pond. And the idea of how the parking and the traffic flow around school, where it's already kids around the island don't necessarily ride the bus here. There's a lot of people pick their kids up in the cars, and it's just gridlock at between 3 and 4 mm-hmm. there, and then adding 60 houses and destroying a forest that they haven't maintained. That's another thing. It's a sickly forest, and if it's in the control of the city, I would say at least maintain that forest. But that idea blew me away too. So there's been lots of examples of the push for this low-income development. And it's just like, hey, where can we pick a spot to do this? It's a must-have type situation. Do you feel that way?
I'm sorry, it's must-have? Oh, that they believe it's must-have.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of it is, I think, money-making. It's an excuse to use open spaces, to use open spaces to develop. And if people object to it, you're a NIMBY, or you're insensitive, or racist, or elitist. Yeah. Also, I think a lot of it is to assuage liberal guilt. the people who are responsible for this the affordable housing problem, instead of getting to the root of the problem, they want to make money off of it by overdevelopment. Why not pay people a living wage? Mm-hmm. Why not subsidize people's housing? Like if you look at the comprehensive plan, one of the elements, a goal in the housing element is to decrease cost burden to people. So I think it's defined as if you spend 30% of your income on housing, your cost burden. So the city wanted to reduce the number of people that fall in that category. Well, instead of spending all this money to destroy the environment, you could subsidize people who are in that category. And raising money for that, I don't think would be that hard. Another thing about the affordable housing is that, the city has destroyed affordable housing just to make these high developments. For example, the pretend eco village was an affordable housing area. There was like regular homes that
hey, if you have $1 million, you can stay in this apartment and feel good about yourself.
Yeah. So what did they do? They mowed the affordable housing area down to put up, again, like I said, these pretend eco village. And these places, do you see what they're going for? It's astounding.
It's about $1 million apartment, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that was all like military housing from the 70s or whatever. And I know that because I grew up that way. We got 5 acres of land. We lived off the grid for a long time in a trailer. And then we bought one of those houses like they destroyed there, picked it up, and my dad was a good carpenter, and we put a basement under it and built our house. And that took a few years, and that was our first house. It was Rambler style, and there was, I think there was 32 Ramblers in that area, and now what is it, 180 apartments going for $1 million? And the premise was a certain portion of those were going to be affordable housing. And there was also a section that they still were able to develop that they just pulled the plug on recently. They could have developed that at the end and made that the affordable housing. But now it's just a meadow. So I hear what you're saying we've destroyed those type of opportunities, as a governance. Yeah,
across the street from the church, I call my neighborhood there where I live, that's an affordable housing neighborhood. People have been living there for a long time. They're small little houses, but when you encroach upon them with high density development, then the city says, oh, well, you know what? We may as well just change the zoning across the street because look at it's right next to this. And that's the argument they're using for this church development, because on Sportsman Club, I think there's 4 houses across the street from the church. And so that area is zoned like R1 or something, 1 house per acre, or maybe 2 or something like that. So the argument the city's trying to make is that, oh, look, it's right next to this, higher density zone. They ignore the lower density on 2 sides of the triangle and focus on, the one side.
Yeah, and people that have retired here, they may have retired here when their house was $250,000. And now, due to development and what's going on in the housing market, now their house is not a $250,000 house. They're no longer working, and it's $1 million house. And now they have to pay taxes on that. And everything around here, I won't say everything, but the majority of things are ran off our property taxes. So what is mom and pop, 70 years old, doing? They're getting priced out of living here. And they've earned the right to be here. And that just breaks my heart to some extent too. I mean, my house, was $340,000 or whatever when we bought it, and now it's $1 million easy.
Yeah,
and it's a shack.
Yeah, my house is practically doubled in value. I didn't do anything.
Right. We haven't done anything either.
And I would. A lot of people go, "Oh, that's great." I think it's bad. I just want to live in my house.
Right.
I'm not. I didn't buy a house so I can make money off it. That wasn't the goal.
Mm-hmm. The end goal was to have a house.
That's right.
Right. And if you sold it, where would you live?
That's right. I have to use that $1 million to buy some other $1 million place.
Yeah.
No, I think that's in part the corruption that I see in city government, because they're more interested in people that live elsewhere than citizens, tax-paying citizens that live on the island and vote for them. And one day when I was on the street, a young man who his name was Wesley, he owned a restaurant downtown, and was complaining that the city government is unresponsive to a lot of small business owners, and they're more interested in tourist traffic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought, exact same thing.
Yeah, it's just like the COVID relief package. Like, how can we help downtown businesses? Well, there's businesses all over the island, but their main concern was just Winslow Way, the ferry traffic and the tourism. And that was it. Other businesses didn't really cross their mind.
Yeah, no, we taxpayers are already captured. They can ignore us. We're not going anywhere. They're interested in bringing people.
But like even with the school funding, it's based on population and enrollment. There's not a 24 or 26-year-old family with a small child able to come here and live. So they're not attracting new kids for the school district or young families whatsoever. There's no real like duplex life out here, right? Mm-hmm. Or quadplex or anything like that. There's not like a starter home that somebody could buy and then move on up as a young family.
Well, yeah, because the affordable homes they've raised to put higher density, expensive homes.
And I don't get the density part when, like I said, we've achieved our growth quota.
That's true.
I think for the next 10 years, maybe?
Yes. If you look at that's another thing the city's done. If you look at the actual growth rate, the city tries to pretend that it's less than that so they can advocate for greater growth. But as you say, we've met even those targets. Mm-hmm. So yeah. There's no real basis for it except money making.
Yep. And if you have the density of 30 plex or 40 plex or 70 like they were trying to do in the toothpick forest, that's all revenue, future revenue. Each one of those people are going to get taxed. So when you're out there protesting with your sign, and I like how you kind of have a chalk outline of the island like it's a dead body on your sign, do you get argumentative people or supportive people? Do you have people that come out of their cars or walk by and have conversations with you? How have you been received over the last 3 years or so?
I've spoken with a wide range of people, people who are angry at me, people who support me, people who not sure what to think, but just want to talk. Mm-hmm. So it's been a complete mix. When I was when they were building the McMansions, I think I spoke with someone from every trade, and guys would come out, and they'd always it surprised me. They'd always ask the same question first, like, "Are you mad at us?" Mm-hmm. And I thought I was surprised because I'm not mad at them at all. Like nothing but respect for actual working people. People who work with their bodies, people who actually produce something. Mm-hmm. That I respect. We're all sort of caught in a web, right? We all have to work. They're building these McMansions, but they're just doing their job. But every one of them, well, not everyone, many of them really supported what I was doing. They said, you know what? We work all over the place. We hate what we see. And a lot of people were sort of in a bad way. And I think the developer probably took advantage of them. Like one guy, he was a Finnish carpenter, came all the way from Puyallup for this job. Mm-hmm. He told me like he just needed the work. It was hardly worth it to him to drive all the way out to Bainbridge Island to do this. A cement truck driver told me he was really upset about it. Same sort of thing. Says, man, I drive all over the place. I can't believe like how much development there is and the amount of, land degradation he sees. Roofers, siders, painters. I spoke with some painters. They were confused. They just couldn't understand, the concept. Then I had one guy who drove a tractor. He was really upset at me. He yelled at me a lot, and the developer was out there yelling at me all the time.
Yeah. Well, hey, for a long time, I'm going to give you credit here where credit is due. Those houses weren't moving when they were built.
No, it took them a long time to sell them.
Took them a long time. So you had impact for sure, and that's something to be proud of. Besides the developer, what type of people threw shade at you? What kind of hate did people have for you? What's their issues?
I hear things like, well, most of the negativity, it comes from people who don't actually stop. They'll drive by and yell at me. I've had people throw stuff at me. People will sometimes drive into the shoulder towards me, stuff like that. And oftentimes the people who are yelling at me, I really can't hear what they're saying because they're driving by. I just hear, but a lot of people are just sort of saying, this is foolish. You can't stop progress. Why even try? Don't you have something better to do?
Yeah. Get a job.
Get a job. I hear that a lot.
Really? Oh. Well, what would you like to see? Oh, before I ask that question, you ran for city council when the spot opened up. What was that experience like?
I don't know. It wasn't that pleasant. I mean, I don't really want to be on city council. I don't want to be an elected official. That's just not what I'm interested in. But since they were appointing someone to fill a seat, I think it was when Matt Chairman resigned. Again, I thought I should pursue all avenues to sort of get my message out there. Even though I don't want to stand on the street with a sign either. I don't do that for fun. I don't want to write letters. I don't want to attend city council meetings. None of those things I find enjoyable. But I felt I should at least try. So yeah, I went through the interview process. It was just so weird. Yeah, I don't know what more to say about that. It's unpleasant.
I hear you. So I guess this may be my final question here. What would you like to see happen for the future of Bainbridge Island and how we as residents of the island interact with city council and make positive change where we stop this unnecessary growth? And I guess that's my opinion. It's unnecessary growth. Maybe it's very necessary to have low-income housing, but I'm not convinced of that. How would you like to see this island shape up in the future and the participation by both residents and governments?
I would love to see people wake up to what's happening. I don't know how to do that, but to stand on the street with my sign, talk to people who come to see me, participate in things like this, talking with you. People have to, get to a place of some kind of, enlightenment on their own.
You have to care.
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, I've cared a lot for the environment, but it wasn't until I really got my hands into the earth that I realized how desperate this situation is. The food production it requires a very stable environment that has been around for essentially 10,000 years or longer. And we're messing with that. We're in big trouble. It's hard to understand, I think, for people. It seems very abstract, but it's real and it's happening. The ice at the ends of the earth are melting, and that is destabilizing the climate. It's very scary. We're only, one crop failure away from big trouble. I think maybe this war in Ukraine, unfortunately, might help people understand that, because Russia is the number one wheat exporter in the world. Ukraine is number 5. That's a lot of wheat that's being taken off the market. And a lot of countries, especially in the Middle East, depend solely on Russian and Ukrainian wheat. So there's going to be some hungry people.
There's hungry people now.
There's going to
water
be more.
too.
And yes, and water. That's a big problem on this island. So how to get people to see what's happening, I don't know. But I hope people can start to see the corruption that's happening in our city. And presently there is a tort lawsuit against the city regarding this Harrison Hospital debacle that Cole Medina was involved in. And the present city is refusing to acknowledge it. I've written to the city and spoken at city council meeting about this issue. Now, what does that have to do with climate change? Well, when the city squanders our money, they have to make it up somehow. And the way they make it up is by development. It increases the tax base. It increases the revenue that they take. But then, to meet all the extra services they need, you have to have more development. It's just this never-ending sort of Ponzi scheme. So I just hope people can kind of wake up to that. Like, we need, real leaders that are willing to face the real problems. I mentioned earlier about this climate change action, report. It's just so incredibly bogus. They have 179 action points in this thing, and every one of them is tied to development. Take the recommendations of the Green Building Task Force so that we have solar panels on new construction and crap like that. I mean, solar energy is not going to save us. It is an illusion.
Same with electric cars.
And electric cars and wind turbines, that requires as much oil or more than just burning, natural gas for electricity. It's a misdirection. Mm-hmm. So I think people see the problem with that action plan is they gave the impression everything is okay. Hey, we're going to reduce emissions 90% in a few years. Don't worry. We're not. Mm-hmm. Emissions are only going to go up and up and up. They will never go down as long as we fail to address land overdevelopment and degradation, and overconsumption.
So what type of things, I want to finish on a positive note, I think, not that what we've said is not positive, but what are some of the things that you really value about our community and enjoy?
I really like the eclectic nature of this community. When I am an introvert, I really don't want to leave my garden. I'm happy when I'm home. But this, actions that I've taken have brought me out of my garden, and I've walked all the dirt roads and the streets of my community. Mm-hmm. And I am really surprised at the different living situations, the different perspectives, the different sort of ways people, are solving their day-to-day life problems, I was really truly impressed and enjoyed talking to a lot of the people I met. It was really, even people who just don't quite get climate change and didn't really want to talk about it, they were talking about different other things. So I think we have a really, people don't consider it diverse because there aren't as many, people of color and minority groups as you find in urban areas, but it's diverse in perspective and opinion and life experience, which is, what I value in people, regardless of who they are, whether you're black or brown or white or, whatever your sort of ancestry is. It's your sort of, your ideas and your heart and your feeling that is what is appealing, and we have a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So I like that. I feel good about it. And I've met a lot of people that I now consider friends that I didn't know before.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in and sharing your ideas and thoughts, Jim. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry I haven't made time to talk to you earlier, but I appreciate the things that you're championing and the way you're going about carrying yourself in our community.
You're welcome. And it's my pleasure to speak with you today.
Awesome. Well, shout out to Sound Reprographics, Tideland Magazine, Blue Canary for your sponsorship, the people that are so kind to subscribe and become flies on the wall on the Patreon page. You've been listening to Bystander. Be kind.